Welcome to the Dental Implant Practices podcast, where each episode will explore how to integrate dental implants into your practice and into bone, with your host, Dr. Philip Gordon.
Welcome back to another episode of the Dental Implant Practices podcast. I'm your host, Philip Gordon, and today it's a huge honor for me to introduce Tony Fiorello. He's a good friend of mine and works with Tatum Surgical. Tony, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here in Kansas City where we're getting rain and snow and sleet. So I'm pretty jealous of where you're at and the weather you're getting, but I'm glad you joined me on the phone here today for this podcast. So down in Florida, and that's where you live and work. And then, you know, like you said, I've met you at, I've traveled all over the world with you from different events and different meetings. We went to the Paris trip in France, and I've seen you at AID meetings in California, and I think this summer we're going to head up to the Great Lakes. So I'm glad to get you on the phone here and talk about some things. What I wanted to do today is, you know, we had the great podcast with the amazing Dr. Tatum, but what I want to do today is break down a little bit more about Tatum Surgical, kind of the corporation and the company and the products behind the man. And obviously, I want to start with you and start getting a little bit of your story. Tell me your official position with Tatum Surgical. Tell me a little bit about your background in business, and then what was your major shift to start with Dr. Tatum and kind of take over the business division of Tatum Surgical, if you could.
Sounds great, Phil. I am currently the president and CEO of Tatum Surgical. I became that in 2008. My background is kind of all over the map, but it's pretty interesting. I started off as a mechanic for Harley Davidson back in the 70s, so I'm kind of showing my age now. Yeah, 1981 tragic motorcycle accident. I was out of work for 3 years and extensive head injury, and they said that I needed to go into a nursing home for rehab, and my parents both said, you know, we know what happens in nursing homes. You go there and you die. So they took me home and took care of me there. And so it was a big shift in my career when I was able to work again, because now I'm a man that doesn't have a lot of dexterity because I disabled my left hand at the time. And so I became a claims manager for a warranty company and kind of got into the suit and tie position. I guess I had the appearance and the technical background that made me a good claims manager. And from there on, I was in the insurance industry for quite a while and got hired by GE Capital and was offered a job here in Tampa. When I came down, it took me a while to sell the house in Connecticut, where I'm from originally. And by the time I got down here, the big position I was going for was filled. So what they told me was that, I'm sorry, the job has been filled, but we can put you on the sales floor. So I was there with about 30 others. And when I got there, I guess they said I had the New York attitude. I like getting up early, working hard, and make as many sales as possible. And so I really raised the bar for the company. And so I advanced to the point that we made our section here in Florida so profitable that they moved it back to our home office in Richmond, Virginia. So the black coats came in and told everybody, listen, either you can move to Richmond, Virginia, or you can take this severance and go find a new job. And luckily, they asked me if I'd like to join on the superior team of GE Capital. I became a regional VP for them. And so I reported to Jack Welsh at the time, and of course the people under him. But it was a very exciting time in my life because it was a pie in the sky for me always to work for such a company and such a man as Jack Welsh. And then in 2003, my wife and I were out to dinner with Dr. Borgner, and he was the person that took over Dr. Tatum's practice when he moved to France. And Dr. Borgner said to me over dinner, Dr. Tatum wants to meet you. And my wife worked for Hilt III, which is Dr. Tatum's son. So I said, oh, what's Hilt want to see me for? And Dr. Borgner says, oh, no, not Hilt. He says, Big Daddy. I says, the Dr. Tatum? I said, what's he want to meet me for? And I'm thinking in my mind, you know, there's no reason this powerful man needs to meet me. But I said, well, what's he want to talk about? He said, well, he's got this small company and he knows your business background. And he wants to know maybe if possibly you'd be interested in joining his forces. And I was a little bit cocky at that time in my life. I had been to the top of my ladder, and I was making good money and had a pretty wife and a nice family. And so I said, well, when's he going to come meet me? And that was probably one of the most ignorant things I said in my lifetime. And Dr. Borgner said, well, he's not coming to meet you. He wants you to go meet him. I said, Dr. Borgner, doesn't he live in France? He says, he sure does. I said, well, I really don't have any reason to go to Europe. He said, well, that's up to you. I said, well, let me sleep on it. So I went home, and my dad, as being my best friend and my mentor, I called him and I said, Dad, this important surgeon wants to meet me over in France. And he said, well, what's it about? I said, I'm not quite sure, but I think it's about a job. And he said, well, you already have a really good job. He says, who's paying for the trip? And I laughed. I said, well, I'm sure he is. And then my dad asked, how many weeks vacation do you have, Tony? I said, Dad, I don't take vacation. I have 8 weeks built up. He says, well, why don't you take a week's vacation and go meet him? So I went back, thought about it, and I called Dr. Borgner. I said, yeah, let's set this thing up. I might as well go see him. And so I got on the phone with Dr. Tatum, and I expected to hear a French accent. And from down in Alabama, I heard this Southern drawl, and we talked for quite a while. And that's before long-distance phone calls were inexpensive. And I remember the phone call was about $370. And
kind of crazy times, huh?
Yeah, when you think about it, and now we're using Skype and WhatsApp and everything else, and FaceTime. That's all he does now is use FaceTime. So it was interesting. So I get on a plane, and I had to fly. I thought I was going to be flying into Charles de Gaulle in Paris, but he says, no, I want you to come over to England. I have a maxi course. Well, they didn't call it a maxi course then, but it was a residency program up in where they wrote the book Wuthering Heights up in the hills of England. I said, okay, so I'll go over there. And at that time, I had some nice suits and nice overcoat, nice briefcase. I was a VP. So I get on the plane. I was used to sitting in the front, and I wasn't sitting in the front anymore. I was sitting in the back, and got to Manchester, took 2 trains and then a cab ride up to this place called Stanbury, and that's where he had his course. And I walked in this room, and I could see my breath, and I'm like, boy, they can't even afford heat. I don't know if I'm in the right place. And I saw an older gentleman, and I heard him grinding on something. So I said, Dr. Tatum? And he turned around, and he says, Fiorello, is that you? I said, yes, sir, it is. He goes, you're not quite what I expected. And he turned around and kept grinding. I'm like, geez, Louise. I says, I flew all this way, and this guy doesn't even like me already. So then I walked over and watched what he was doing. And at the time, I didn't know what he was doing, but he was grinding the flange off of a denture, getting it ready to go onto a Rames frame. So he said, just give me a minute. I'm just finishing this up. So we sat down and talked and talked and talked. And as you know, he's a long-winded person, but he's very, very intelligent. And he asked me everything from my religion to my home life, to my kids, to my parents. And I was intrigued. I said, this guy is really something else. So he said, tomorrow morning, I want you to come to class, sit with the 15 doctors we have here, take some notes, and see if you're interested. I said, well, I'm not even sure what you're asking me if I'm interested in. So the next day I showed up, and I'm a good note taker. And back then I had a BlackBerry, so I'm looking up words that I didn't know what they meant. And so I took notes for a week. And the second to last day I was there, a lady, Mary, came in, and she was like the normal edentulous person. Her face was caved in. She had no vertical dimension. It looks like somebody hit you with a brick. The lady sat down before that hit him, and he said, Mary, today I'm going to change your life. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I've changed a lot of women's lives, but not for the better. I don't know what he's going to do for her, And so then he proceeded to give her IV sedation, and I see outcome osteotomes, which I would call chisels at the time. And he took out a mallet, which I called a hammer, and got corrected on. And he proceeded to place a Rames frame. And I had some extensive back surgery prior to that. And boy, there was sweat pouring down my back. I'm like, boy, this doesn't look like the dentistry I've ever had. I hope I never have it, And after the surgery was done, he took Mary out of sedation, and he handed her a mirror. And I get choked up every time I think about this. This lady started bawling, crying. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. He says, I told you I was going to change your life today, Mary. She had full dentition. The ramus frame had been placed. The denture had been affixed with Lu attachments. And her face was full again. She had the vertical dimension. He made a miracle that day. And so I didn't even know why I was there. This was way out of my ballpark. So that night I went back to my room. And this was 2003. And in my room, I'm sitting there thinking, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? The next morning I woke up and we were in this cute little bed and breakfast. I walked down to have a cup of coffee and a crumpet or whatever they served at the time. And here was the woman that he did the ramus frame, and she was eating breakfast. And she looked at me and smiled again. Of course, she was a little swollen, but she was eating a full breakfast. And she looked over and she nodded to say thank you to me, thinking that I was a clinician like Hilt Tatum. And never in my life have I felt that important. I made people millions of dollars. I've put businesses together very successfully, but none of it compared to what that lady had just given me. The acknowledgement of what Hilt Tatum did for her was phenomenal. So that, I felt pretty darn good. So then Dr. Tatum came strolling in and he says, so how you doing this morning? I said, very good. And so I pointed over to the lady and he just nodded, like he knew she would be that good. Humble man that he is. And he said, I'd like for you to come back to my chateau in France. I said, when? He says, today. So I still had a couple days left of vacation. So we went over to his chateau, come rolling up on the chateau. And as you know, because you've been there, the electric gates open. I see this big circular driveway and the chateau built in the 1700s. I'm like, wow, now this is the game I want to play. So we roll in and he starts bragging about his cars, and I'm a car guy. So he opens the garage. I see 3 Jags. I see a Bentley, see a couple Chryslers. I'm like, this is awesome. So he introduces me to Rosvita, his beautiful wife. And I said, this guy's got it all. He's got a chateau. He's got Bentley. He's got Jags. He's got a gorgeous wife. And he's probably the best clinician that I know. So he says, why don't we go for a ride? So I'm rubbing my hands together. I figure we're going to go for a ride at Bentley. He pulls out this little Nissan Micra. And at the time, I was doing bodybuilding. I was in pretty good shape, and we're shoulder to shoulder in this car. I'm like, oh my God, I've never been in a car so small. So we're driving along. And he says, Dr. Tatum says to me, I'd like you to write me a business plan. So I said, Dr. Tatum, can you pull over? He says, now, Tony, do you need to relieve yourself? I said, no, sir, I want to talk to you face to face. And I said, what's up? And he says, I'd like you to write me a business plan. I said, Dr. Tatum, that's what I do for a living. I'm good at it, but it's going to be smoke and mirrors because I don't even know what your business does. I know what you did yesterday, and I was proud to be an observer of it, but writing your business plan is going to be smoke and mirrors. So he told me about his company that he had started back in the 70s, and that it wasn't commercialized, that he had just done this to supply himself. He made his own implants and he supplied his friends that wanted to be successful. And I said, well, I'm not really quite sure, what you're asking me to do. He says, well, I need somebody with business sense. And from what I hear, you have a lot of business sense. You work for Jack Welch, blah, blah, blah. So I thought about it and I put my right hand out. And as you know, I'm all about handshakes, and my handshake is, I think it's golden. It's better than my signature. So I shook his hand. I said, I'll do it. In the back of my mind, I'm like, what did I just do? But I knew it was the right thing. I was just following my gut feeling. So we had a couple of days there in France. And so I flew home. And now I got to tell my wife that I gave up my dream job at GE. The ivory tower was going to go away, And so I walked in. I said, Rebecca, I said, I just want to let you know that I'm going to resign from GE and work for Dr. Tatum. She said, I knew you were gonna. I said, Rebecca, how did you know that? She goes, for the last 8 years, I've worked for the Tatums. And you asked me why I work all these long hours, why I'm so passionate about what I do. I asked her why she didn't make more money because, I was the breadwinner, but I thought she should earn more money. But that had nothing to do with the conversation, really. She said, I knew you'd take the job. So I had to resign from GE, and it's funny because they owed me back pay for vacation I didn't take, a severance. So I had a pretty good package. So I called Dr. Tatum. I said, you know what? I don't think it's fair that you pay me because I don't even know what you do or what your company does. So I told him that I'd work for 6 months for free. And that's what we did. So I started working for him a couple weeks later, and I worked for 6 months for nothing and learned what I could, the hard way from the ground up. And that took me into a sales position with Tatum Surgical. At the time, it was called Suncoast Dental. And so I started coming up with some ideas for Dr. Tatum, and he would check in with me all the time. I mean, all the time. And I said, the first thing we want to do is brand your company. I said, Suncoast. Suncoast is a car wash. It's a cleaners. It's everything in Florida, Suncoast. I said, you need to use your name. Oh, no. I don't want to use my name. He says, my name doesn't matter. I said, no, your name really does matter. So I gave him 10 choices, and the choice that he took was Tatum Surgical. And so that's how the company was named. That's how I became part of the company. Now, did I become the president from walking through the door? Absolutely not. Norma Woods ran the company, which she was a dear friend of Dr. Tatum's, and she held the company together even when he lived in France, and phenomenal at it. And she was probably the truest person I've ever spoken to. She said, kid, you don't know how many facets there are to the Tatum family and business. You're never going to know it all. And I was cocky being a VP for GE Capital. I said, I'll know it all. Well, I found out very quickly I didn't know much, and so for the last, this will be my 16th year with Dr. Tatum. There's been trials and tribulations, but I'll tell you what, there's not a minute I regret taking the job with Dr. Tatum.
It's a great story. I think anybody who's met, Dr. Tatum knows the kind of person he is, and if they've met you, they know the quality individual you are. So it's been a great relationship, I'm sure, to have the two of you kind of working together, and you helping figure out a way to implement his dreams and his craft and his vision, and you kind of bringing it to life and helping the company grow and reach more clinicians and change more lives. I mean, and that's, I know that's what you guys do on a regular basis. You help dentists see a different path, and you help dentists find a different way, and then help them change patient lives through ways they never thought possible. And that's an awesome thing to do.
Well, I went to technical school for high school. You had to take an entrance exam up in Connecticut, and it was really hard to get into school. And luckily I got in, because I have a mechanical mind. I can think three-dimensionally like Dr. Tatum can, so we were a good match. But in that trade school, I learned how to do blueprints. At the time, it wasn't CAD/CAM. It was all line drawings and things like that. But who ever knew that I'd be helping design implants and abutments and transfers and scan bodies now? But he can dream something up. He can call me, and I actually draw it as he's talking to me. And then I scan it and email it to me. He goes, how can you draw what I'm thinking? I says, no, because I can see it also while you're saying it. He's very good at explaining what he's seeing in his mind. So we've had a really good road together.
Yeah, excellent. So early on in his career, Dr. Tatum was making his own implants, and obviously it transitioned at some point to, him kind of designing them and having other people, having the machining types going up. But tell me about the early days of the company when you started. I mean, when you got there, you're just basically taking this small company where he was making implants for himself and maybe his students, and you were trying to kind of build it and grow it from there. What was the landscape like of the implant world, and kind of what was able for you guys to have some success, obviously in this little niche that you have of, the Tatum mentors tribes, and, help define your guys' role in the implant world?
Well, there were a couple times, when I first started, I started looking at things, and I just didn't see anything attractive to what he was doing except for the end result, which was solving the patient's problems, and their clinical needs, which is fabulous. But I didn't see how we could sell that. And so I would look at some of his implant kits and packaging and just the way of doing things. And I had been trained at GE, with quality. They have Six Sigma training, black belt training, things like that, and where you really drill down and you find out what the attributes of an item or of a system, and you promote those because that's what's going to attract other people. And so I started designing the kits themselves. He already had all the components, but he was old school. He made, it was a little metal box with a bunch of stuff in it, and it was organized to him, but to go to somebody coming out of school and showing it to him, it was just overwhelming. So I simpled it down so I could understand it. I wasn't a clinician. And I tried to make everything that it was step by step, A through Z, 1 through 100. So it was very easy for me to explain, which was the first hurdle. And if I could explain it and people trusted my judgment and my explanation, possibly we'd get a new customer. And that's what we did.
Excellent. So in 2003, when you joined, implant dentistry was still very major, commercialized with the big companies, and you guys were this small niche company. How were you able to find your niche and stay true to it and make such an impact?
Well, what I did is the first thing I did was I studied and found out how many implant companies there were at the time, and it's just a little speck in the world right now, because at the time it was about 214 implant companies worldwide, and now I think we're probably over 700. You would know better than I. But I looked, and there were these big orthopedic companies that owned implant companies and things like that, and huge Swiss screw machines going 24/7. And here we were using an aerospace company locally here to manufacture the implants, and they helped Dr. Tatum develop a lot of things before he got his FDA approval. And what a lot of people don't know is Hill Tatum had the first FDA approval for marketing in 1981, which was actually 1 year prior to Nobel in the United States for a titanium root form system. And so, he should have published more, but he was more interested in treating patients than promoting himself or what he was doing. So that was basically what I had to do. I had to go out there and start telling his story and explain to people why the company wasn't bigger, but his results were so awesome and successful.
Yeah, it's one of those things to kind of chase the mainstream, shiny new toy, but it's his approach is like, let's do things right. Let's do it surgically, fundamentally, and the results will take care of themselves. And I think those are different philosophies with company, right? You've got one company who's trying to sell everything to the masses, so they have to commercialize everything. Maybe make it like a one size fits all, right? Because Nobel's trying to sell to everybody in the world. And then you've got this one company developed by the implant legend, the innovator himself, saying let's just make things that work and make things for people who want to do more. And those are different business philosophies, right out of the gate.
Yeah, and that's what I saw was that he wasn't looking for money, he wasn't looking for notoriety. He just wanted to treat the patient. And he came out with a comment to me one time. He goes, "I don't make implants to sell. I make implants to treat patients." And that really struck a chord with me, because as much as I made people money on Wall Street, the end game was still money. And his viewpoint was not money at all. And even to this day, he doesn't ask for the money. He's just looking to that he's spreading his knowledge through other people and treating more people. And I think that's pretty admirable.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he could charge 10 times more than he does for his time and his training and all that. I guarantee it. But then it wouldn't be accessible to teach, and it wouldn't be accessible for his patients. And I think that's what he wants, is he wants to teach others and treat his patients. And, you really get that sense when you get to know him, that he's teaching directly to you. He's talking to you, and, his presence is a very powerful thing. And, that's a very special characteristic. And so that's very apparent when you talk to him.
Well, it's funny. I've been in a lot of lectures and a lot of classrooms with him, and I always sit at the back of the room because I can basically say what he's saying because I've heard it so many times. But here I got some young doctors sitting in front of me on Facebook or playing solitaire, and I'll tap them on the shoulder. I'm like, you're probably going to miss out on something important. And sometimes there's some, snide comments or rude remarks. But on day number 2, when it starts sinking into these people, these young clinicians, the story he's telling and what he can do, those computers get shut down or they go into a notebook, and these people are typing as fast as they can. They figure he's going to be 85 on April the 22nd of this year, and he can run rings around me. I'm going to be 57 in the same month. He'll work till 3 a.m. I said, listen, I got to cut out at about midnight. He says, what, are you working a half day today? And I says, I guess I am. I guess I'm a lightweight. But the guy is just phenomenal.
So what type of, let's get into Tatum Surgical. I mean, I know you guys do a lot of things. It's a very niche company. It's not for the masses, and I think it's better that way. But you make some really great things for implant surgical training and restorative, fixtures and, all kinds of instruments. Let's kind of break down, a big portion of your products. I know there's too many products to cover. So I would encourage people to go to tatumsurgical.com to see it all. But where are you guys at nowadays with your offering, and kind of what's going on in the company that you're proud of and that you guys are really putting out in the field?
Well, when I first started, I didn't know a lot about the implants, so I was really pushing instruments because they were basically tools, and the tools of the trade are probably easiest thing to sell, if it's a quality item. But as time went on, if you sell something that's really terrific, you're never going to sell that person again because you've just sold them a lifetime instrument. And very quickly understood that implants are where you have to be for survival. And we have so many different implants, you just wouldn't believe it. But I can tell you honestly, I do numbers every day just because I'm a numbers guy. But 93% of our sales are in the tapered implant form, whether it's our Integrity, which is a screw retained system with a huge screw in it. I'll explain that a little bit to you also. But then we have our traditional tapered implant that the abutment gets cemented into place and prepped like a post and core. And then we have a one-piece implant from 3 millimeters in diameter all the way to 8 millimeters in diameter. And for certain people with limited income, it's a fantastic way to treat that patient and not break the bank or make it attainable for that person that otherwise couldn't have it.
Yeah, so you've got quite a lineup, being from implants that were developed quite a while ago up to implants that are really kind of up to the current themes of what other implant companies are making. I know a lot of your implants maybe were either tapped in or threaded in, or now you've got some that are tapered and screwed in, and so you've got all kinds of applications. Let's go off with your tapered implant design and maybe talk about the the Integrity implant. That's kind of your newest line, right? That's probably more up to the traditional 2-piece implant, right?
Yes, and what I saw was that with Dr. Tatum's tapered implant, that I go back into the archives. We still have of his implants from the 60s, which people weren't even talking about implants unless it was in a dark room somewhere that nobody could hear you. The tapered design is the same as a tooth. Anatomically, they're correct. You're not going to run an undercut. You got adjacent roots you have to worry about, things like that. So the tapered implant makes all the sense in the world. And as we know, like a doorstop, if something's tapered, the more you kick it under the door, the tighter it gets. So for immediate stability, a tapered implant is way more successful than a parallel wall in my eyes. And, I've got engineering background and everything points to tapered. The Integrity, all we did was name something. I came up with the name because of Tatum and what he does for people. And I think it's Integrity all the way. So he and I trademarked that name, but it was taking an older design of his, a tapered implant, and just making it current by naming it and putting components with it that were current. We needed retrievability, but in looking at the engineering aspects of it, Hill Tatum has always had the largest screw connection in the industry. Starting day one, it's been a 2.5 millimeter counterbore into the implant, which, I see implants now that have a 1.2, 1.4 screw. You put a 2.5 next to it. I mean, it's like a still home, either being on toothpicks or telephone poles.
Yeah. No, I know your guys' screw that you put in there for restorative is almost like a mini implant. 2.5 millimeters is, that's like a mini implant you're putting in there.
And what we did is we combined that along with I'm not going to say a Morse taper, because me being an engineer by trade, that's only a 1 to 2 degree taper and it welds itself together. We didn't do that, but that angle, which I'm not going to divulge the angle because it's one of our namesakes. But anyway, it takes all the loads, the vertical loads, with the masticatory forces, and into the implant. It doesn't put those stresses on the screw. And everybody knows about screw loosening and screw fracturing. We just don't see it because when those vector forces are hitting the abutment or the crown, those loads are transferred into the implant and not on the screw. And you can basically take the screw out of our abutment. It would still take all the loads without even having a screw in it.
Sure. So you've got a long tapered connection, which adds huge increased stability. You've got a robust implant prosthetic screw, which is only going to do wonders for load bearing and abutment connections. So those are huge things when it comes to implants, because that if placed correctly, your implant's not going to fail. Right, the abutment's not going to fail, the screw's not going to fail. So you're never going to be in a position where, hey, I've placed this implant correctly, but the product itself failed. And I think that's a huge thing, because the last thing you want is to do a surgery right, but then the product's not working for you.
I'm deeply involved with the FDA also, and the EU. Now it's EU, but with the CE mark, because we have both. We've been approved by both parties, and when they come in and they ask, because they audit us every year, at least once a year, and ask us about failure rates, and we just say we don't have any. At first, they start digging. They're like, well, they look up to see if there's any complaints, this and that. Well, we just haven't had any, and that's since Tatum got his FDA approval in 1981. I don't think you can find another implant company that can say that.
Well, that's a huge benefit. That goes back to design and quality, attention to detail, and then the service that you guys provide. Obviously, you're not just making a sell and moving on. I mean, you guys really care about your customer, you care about the clients, you care about their training and all that. And so you're not selling them and treating them and streeting them. You're actually taking care of your people, and you've got great customer follow up.
Well, the other thing is, I think service is everything, and along with the name integrity, the staff has to have integrity also. And if they're not in it for the patient, for the long game, then they wouldn't work for us. So what we try to do is we supply everything at a reasonable cost. The company still makes money, but we're not making a killing. You don't have to, excuse the words, but rape and pillage to make a living. If you give an honest product that's going to change somebody's life, and I think it's all in the value of the product. Absolutely.
I can say from experience, the Integrity implant's a great implant, and I've placed, a few myself. I've got a kit, and love them so far. It's been great. Some of your other products that I've used, some surgically and some just in training, though. I've also got a couple of your other products. Your instruments for sinus lift and your Easy Out periotomes. Those got to be two of your biggest sellers, I would think, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, the Easy Out periotomes are like the golden child. They're a luxating type instrument, as you know. A lot of those type instruments on the market, but we started making those back in probably 2005, 2006. We perfected something that he already had. But I did a little bit of engineering on it, so they can actually, somebody chips or breaks one of the working men, they can be retipped for $30. Most companies say, listen, this luxator is $110, and if you break it, you pay another $110. So it's a big service item, but in 10 years, we sold over 13,000 of them. And so if you look at everything we sell, we've sold more periotomes than probably anything, any one instrument. And they're phenomenal. Made the handle so it fits everybody's paw, so they're not just using their fingers; they're actually using their palm and directing it down the tooth, so they can size the periodontal ligament and expand the cribriform plate to an atraumatic extraction.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I won't even do an extraction in my office unless those periotome luxators are on my counter. Like I won't even extract the tooth. So it's basically
it's funny.
And if I do it right, that's the only thing I need to use. I don't even need the forceps or all that. So.
Well, I've assisted in a couple surgeries where we're extracting teeth, and I got the suction going. And when the suction pulls the tooth out because you just used the lux, it's a good thing,
Yeah, that's how I extract it. I luxate it, and my assistant catches it with the suction, and we're done. I mean,
is that something?
That's how 95% of mine go, unless the roots are just crazy, and then I have to split it with a handpiece, and then I go back to the same instrument. But I mean, that's how I do all my extractions in my office, and I tell people every day, I said, do yourself a favor and get a set of these. It'll change the way you extract teeth because it's so much better than just brutalizing the bone and butchering the site, because this is often more times than not going to be a future implant site, right? So we want to protect the anatomy and protect the health of the bone, and those teeth are come out just beautifully with little effort and little surrounding damage.
Yeah, they're phenomenal instrument, and all the VAs have them. All the big correctional facilities have them because they're shucking teeth day in and day out. And all they do is buy more of them because everybody loves them. They're great. And to go onto the sinus instruments, Dr. Tatum invented the procedure of sinus grafting and sinus lift, back in the 70s. And his instruments he made back then, it was a set of, I believe, 29. And I started looking at these things, and if you pull out the instruments and you hand it to a new student, say we're going to do a sinus augmentation, they don't even know where to start. So early on in the game, I said, Dr. Tatum, why don't you pick out 10 of your favorite instruments, and we're going to make a kit with 10. And he said, no. And I said, well, I know you're Dr. Maximus, but we can't do it that way. Let's make this thing saleable. And so we started making the kits with 10 instruments. And ever since we made that change and people use the instruments, it's like kids in a candy store. It's very easy to sell them. But the other thing is that some companies miss is that the sinus instruments have to have a sharp edge to them because you get a purchase on the sinus floor and you're levering out with the spoon, up to the membrane. Some of them are dull. You go into the lateral wall and you slide over it. It slides so easily, you puncture the membrane. So, there's some real benefits to getting the right instrument for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I wanted to wait till I was doing sinus lifts in my office to buy a kit. And now that I've introduced sinus lifts in my office, of course, I said, well, I'm going to buy the right kit. And so obviously that was through you guys. And it's fantastic. I love it. Obviously I'm not doing sinus lifts every day, but when I do, I'm using the right kit and I feel good about it. You guys have fixation kits and, more osteotomes than I ever thought imagined. You've got straight and offset and tapered and, you must have 200 osteotomes. I'm not kidding.
More than that. And,
yeah.
If you knew what they weighed, because, the power of an instrument's in the weight of the instrument if you're moving bone or moving tissue. And so the surgical mallet's weighted for a reason. And also the osteotomes are. A hollow instrument, you have to hit it harder. And, that's rough on the doctor and it's rough on the patient. When you're using a heavier mallet and a heavier osteotome, you can advance that with baby taps. And, you've been there, you've done that. But these tiny baby taps are moving the bone to where it should be into the anatomical position that it used to be in. And now it's time to place the implant.
And that's the biggest difference. I noticed your guys' instruments, they're just such better quality. I've gotten some of these cheap ones in the past, and that's what they are. They're cheap, and you have to use them wrong to try to use the instruments. Ultimately, you end up breaking them. You end up breaking tips. You end up the surgery gets sloppy because you're not using the right instrument. And I think once you start investing in your instruments, like you do your education, the surgeries get so much more predictable. And I think that's what some clinicians don't understand is say, when it comes to instruments and your stuff's not even that expensive, but I just mean you get what you pay for. And someone think, well, why would I get a whole kit of, osteotomes or a whole kit of, elevators or periotomes? And I say, because using the right instrument in the right way during surgery makes the biggest difference. And I think that's the thing I've noticed between buying more and more of your stuff. I just keep thinking, wow, this is amazing. One, it lasts forever, so you don't have to reinvest. But two, the surgeries go that much more predictable because you're using a better product. And I think that's the part you can't overemphasize.
And when you think about the inventor of that, a lot of times he's invented the procedure from square one. So why wouldn't he make the instrument correctly? Now, I could make something look pretty and probably function fine, but I'm not a clinician, so I can't be the inventor of that, the end game for that patient. So Hilt Tatum is the genius for sure.
Yeah. And that's why I thought, well, I'm not going to outsmart this guy who's already come up with the procedure, one, and two, the right instrument. So let me just follow in his footsteps, do what he tells me, use what he tells me, and and hopefully try to shoot for something close to the results that he's getting. That's kind of been my thought. It's like, all right, well, let's not try to reinvent the wheel here. There's people who've got this figured out. Let's just go ahead and do what they're doing and try to learn from them.
And you know how humble he is because you've been around him enough, but he always says, well, I'm a simple man with a simple mind. I'm like, well, if he's simple, I don't want to even term myself, but he says he's learned from his mistakes, but I'll tell you what, he must have made a lot of mistakes because he's perfect now. That's for sure.
I could write an encyclopedia on my mistakes, but we won't go there. So
no, we're not going there today for either one of us for sure.
Now, so another thing I love about your company, and in addition to Dr. Hilt Tatum yourself just being amazing people and always there for people and always available, you guys have these amazing events from time to time. I mean, I took my wife and my newborn baby Isla to your Paris trip, and it truly was the event of a lifetime. And it was an amazing event that me and my wife will cherish forever. And got to spend a week with Dr. Tatum and yourself and such a great group of people. This summer, I'm going to the Resnick event up in the Great Lakes, which is another mentor meeting that you guys have. So talk with you about your mentors meetings, the events that you guys have, and why your group is different. Because I think you guys have like this cult following for a reason. And it's not because, anything other than just the true learning and camaraderie you have is so different than any other place.
Well, years ago, I'd probably say a good 14 years ago, I said to Dr. Tatum, listen, when you're retiring, he said, well, I'm never going to retire. I says, or when you're gone, I says, how do we preserve your legacy? You haven't published that much, and you've got all these people that follow in your footsteps and are doing such a phenomenal job at it. I says, what do you think about having a mentor group? And he says, well, I've always thought about that, but he says, I feel a little funny asking people to teach in my behalf. I said, well, I don't have a problem asking it, and so we went out and we talked to some of the bigger users of ours, clinicians that work through Tatum Surgical, but have been taught by him exclusively, after doing a lot of different things. And we asked them if they would join the forces and be a mentor for other people. And there was no monetary value. We weren't going to pay them. But what we were telling them, or what I was telling them, was it's paying it forward. Hilt Tatum paid you for next to nothing. You've treated all these patients. You've made a great livelihood for yourself, but you've changed a lot of lives also. Can you help us do that for other people? And so we came out with a list. We have about 30 of them worldwide right now. Most of them are in the United States, but we have a list, and it's published. It's on the web, that you can look at a certain procedure, say a sinus graft procedure, and there'll be 29 of them are very proficient sinus graft. You can call any one of them any time of day, get their background, get their take on your case, send them over a file for them to look at. And they have an open door policy. If you want to visit their office and either assist them or just look over the shoulder, they're all open to it, which is phenomenal. I don't think any other company does that. And it's all in thanks to Hilt Tatum teaching them.
Yeah, no, I don't know any place that does that. I mean, I try to do that for people, but I'm nobody who knows anything. And it's amazing that you guys have a group of people that are such experts and such high masters of what they're doing that'll basically say, look, we're in this together. This is a team sport. Let's lift each other up, because unfortunately you have a different group of people that say, I know it all. I'm going to keep the distance between me and you and go the other route with it. And so it's a breath of fresh air to be around those people. Well,
the first thing I want to say is, a lot about everything, Phil. And, it's great that you're humble, but don't sell yourself short, because you're worth a lot to the community for sure. And what you're doing with bringing everybody together is doing exactly what we're trying to do. Spread the wealth of knowledge. The second thing is with the mentor group, Dave Resnick, as you well know, is a pretty strong clinician. He and his wife have 4 practices, and they practice dentistry day in and day out. And, they're in the rural part of Minnesota, but, they've got over a 6,000 patient base, which is, I think that's a pretty nice book of business. But he gives the mentor meeting that we host in Duluth every 2 years. And last time we had over 100 people. There was 50 clinicians, but we invite their families, their wives or their husbands and their kids. And, we rent the Glen Sheen Mansion. We have a nice catered dinner there. It's just a good time for all. And so I says, Dave, what do you want to charge for this? Because we, of course we support it. He says, well, just cover my expenses. It's $400 a person. And people almost laugh at that. They're like, $400. So he's just paying it forward. He's paying his debt back to Dr. Tatum, because all the things that he's learned from him.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate those kind words, but yeah, I hear you. I mean, I wrote the check out for Dave this year for the thing. I said, well, this has just got to be for like my lunch, right? There's got to be more, there's got to be more for the CE, and I'm bringing the kids and all this and that. But it's amazing. I'm looking forward to it. I've never been to that part of the country. I know it's going to be an amazing event. The people there are fantastic, and so I'm really looking forward to that one. And and other events you guys have coming up. It's like I said, the community part's great, and it's amazing the influence that Dr. Tatum has had on all these people. Which I guess brings me to my next section. Where's this thing going after Dr. Tatum's done teaching, or at some point gone and from the earth? Unfortunately, we all have our time here. What's Tatum Surgical look like moving forward? I mean, I know the mentors are involved. I know you're involved, but what's that transition going to look like?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I get asked that all the time. Dr. Tatum's going to be 85 in April. My dad just turned 84 last week. And so I have 2 dads, my natural dad and then, my second dad, which is Dr. Tatum. And I care about them both a lot. But, none of us are going to live forever. And we've got a lot of clinicians that are invested in us, as a company supporting them. And what's going to happen when there's no more Dr. Tatum on earth? And so what we did is we put the company in a trust a couple years back, and his family owns the trust. I'm named in the trust, but it's just for security. It's a good thing. But what's nice about it, company cannot be sold unless I sign off on it. And I know it's in Dr. Tatum's wishes not to sell the company, but to serve people. Now, if somebody comes along and they're going to fulfill his wish and, it's a pie in the sky for his family, of course we would do the right thing. But the company's not going anywhere, that's for sure. Like I said, I'm going to be 57 in April. My son's going to turn 19 next week. My daughter's only 11. So I'm going to be working probably for the next 20 years. So nobody's got to worry about that.
Oh, I know you. You're one of the hardest working guys I know. So you'll be working till you're dead as well, I'd imagine. But just because you don't like sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah. And what's so funny is, my wife, Rebecca, works with us full time, and she puts in 10 hours a day also. But it's funny because now we don't have to explain to each other why we're so late at work, because we're there together.
There you go.
It's
yeah.
a good thing.
It's a little easier. My wife's always like, well, when are you getting home? And I'm like, as soon as the patients leave my office, I don't know. But when you work with somebody who who's in your job, they get it. I kind of see you as like the consigliere for the Godfather, back in the old Godfather movie. It's like, you're taking care of the family business in a way that they would want it taken care of, and I think that's a great role.
Well, we're family. There's no doubt about it. We're family. And, my dad is very ill with pancreatic cancer. And Dr. Tatum told me, he says, if there is a day or a week or a month that you need to close the company down and your whole family, has to leave to take care of your dad, this and that, he says, do it. Now, what other boss is going to say that? What other owner of a company is going to say that? Would I let that happen? No, because I wouldn't let our clinicians down. And of course we have plenty of employees to take the helm if they need to. But every day that he calls me, Dr. Tatum, how's your daddy? How's your daddy? That's it.
Well, I think your guys' your care comes across. I can't think of a day where I've called the office or emailed you that I haven't been able to get a hold of you personally, and I don't know a lot of companies where that's the case. I've called a lot of implant companies, and they won't even let my front foot get in the door because they don't want they just don't want to talk to some dentist or just some guy, right? And so I think it's amazing the way that you guys open up to people.
Well, the other thing is, if you're not in it for the right reasons, you shouldn't be in it at all. And if it's just for money, I can point people in 100 different directions to make money, but they're never going to have the caringness for the patient like you guys do, you guys and girls do. That end game, money follows when you do good things. You don't have to just make money to make money.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if you do things right and have a little bit of business sense, things will happen, as far as the money comes in. And you don't have to be crooked to make a good living. And I think that's, if it's not about the short game, it's about the long game. You can swindle anybody for $1, but, to really make it work the long game, you've got to be in it for the right reasons. And people know that and people see that.
Well, my dad's Sicilian, and if you know the Sicilian heritage, he says, never disrespect your name or your family. And he says, and always treat people like you want to be treated, and you won't have to hide from anybody. And you know what? I can take my family anywhere in the world, and we're welcomed. And I do take honor in that. And when you walk in church in the morning and you're holding your daughter's hand and you're smiling from ear to ear, it's not because you just made a lot of money. It's because you're happy with who you are.
Absolutely. Well, Tony, I've taken up enough of your time today. I've got to go. I got to finish up my lunch break here and go treat some patients. And I know you've got to get back to more important work than chatting with me. So I appreciate you taking the time to discuss things with me today. I always love talking with you. You guys are doing an amazing job. Tell me, my listeners again, where people can get a hold of you and how they can get a hold of your company and where you guys are going to be at next.
Okay. There's just one more thing I want to bring up.
Sure.
There's one thing that we're working on right now, and it's digital design and the digitized workflow. We've partnered up with a company in Germany, and as of last month, they have all our files for our implant system and all the prosthetic components. And within 8 months, we should have a digital workflow that will comply and work with 3Shape and ExoCAD. So it'll bring us right up to the libraries and the guidance documents. It'll bring it right up till today.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear that because I love how traditional and old school your company is, but I love the fact that you're bringing on the new wave and joining the technological forefront. So that'll allow people to get custom abutments and other things milled out to where they can be scanning impressions and more custom type abutments that I think are becoming more and more popular with the younger generation. So I think that's a fantastic business move, and I think that'll serve clinicians real well to come.
And to answer your question, anybody can get hold of us 10 hours a day at Tatum Surgical. It's 888-360-5550, tatumsurgical.com. And my email, it comes right to me, is tatumimplants@verizon.net. Be glad to take calls or emails, and I'm always available.
Excellent. Tony, I really appreciate your time today. Look forward to seeing you again soon. If I don't catch you at a meeting sometime this spring, I'll see you at the Mentors meeting this summer up in the Great Lakes with Dr. Resnick as well. Look forward to that, and hope you guys are doing well.
Give your wife and kids a hug for me.
Will do. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Phil. Bye-bye.
Bye.